Yeah, that's right. So I basically did exactly what Casey did. I picked a team who I thought, and we all kind of thought, would be a lot better than they are. And you guys might know who I'm going to talk about here, but it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like, this is a team who, coming into this year, did so much in the offseason, built a team on paper that looked like it just worked. They finally had, depth scoring. They had guys to play defined roles in the bottom six. They had another puck moving defenseman. Their goaltending was shored up. Well, after all of those moves, guys, it has not worked out at all. They ended up selling at the deadline, trading away Jake Gensel, which is just insane. They sit 11th in the East right now, 21st in the entire NHL, and it's just not been a good season for this team. They're technically only 5 points back right now, but it's so late in the season, like there's no chance they make it. So it's a complete failure for this team, despite the fact that guys like Crosby and it might be kind of Jari to a lesser extent, are having great seasons. So, it's tough to see Crosby being wasted away here, but it's just so surprising that this team is this bad. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of regression from the team in general. It's definitely not Sidney Crosby. He's been phenomenal, but Erik Karlsson's not a Norris Trophy winner right now. Malkin's, taking steps back, and you didn't see any depth from this team, even though, I think in the preseason, we were like, hey, they finally have formed themselves a real bottom six or a real bottom nine that looks like they can score some goals and contribute and help out Crosby. Well, they haven't really got that. Like, we were super excited about guys like Riley Smith and, hopeful on a Rickard Rakell, and they've been okay. They've contributed in ways, but not really the way we want them to contribute. So a lot of struggles for Pittsburgh, and I'm afraid to say too much more on the Pittsburgh Penguins because they play the Devils tonight. And usually if I dump on a team too much, they just beat the Devils next game. So I got to be careful what I say, I guess.
Yeah, it's just, when I was looking at a case, like we talked about depth scoring, and just like after Crosby, they just have nothing. Like, Evgeny Malkin is on pace for 62 points. Riley Smith is on pace for just 42 points. Rickard Rakell, 41 points. And everybody after that is just not contributing. You've got Letang and Karlsson. Karlsson had 101 points last year. This season, he's on pace for 50. Half of that, guys. Like, it's just that type of regression doesn't happen year over year, like to many players. But,
Jonathan Huberdeau.
For many players, yeah, Huberdeau was one of them. But that kind of stayed, right? Maybe that was just exposing what Huberdeau really was, is closer to, a point per game, 70-point player as opposed to 125 or whatever he had the 1 year. But it's just crazy, guys. Like, I just didn't see them being this bad. We knew that they were going to have to be better than the season prior to make the playoffs, because the whole Eastern Conference really got better and more competitive. So we knew that they were going to have to be better in certain ways, but it just hasn't gone well for Pittsburgh, and I'm just shocked.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I really feel for Sidney Crosby because at 36, he almost has 40 goals on the season. I believe he has 37 on the year currently. He had another couple of goals the other night. And what a year that he's having. He just continues to drag them into the fight down the stretch here. They're not going to make the playoffs, but, all the credit in the world goes to Crosby, and outside of him, a guy that I was wondering about when the two of you were rhyming off some names is a guy like Brian Rust and where his production has been at this season for this team. And
Rust, though, is one of the only guys, like, he has 48 and 54. Like, that's, that's giving you something at least, as opposed to Rakell and Rakell and Smith, and especially Karlsson. Like, you bring Karlsson in to be the guy, or at least to share those duties, and he just hasn't produced anything. And in terms of goals for, by the way, like, this team is, I believe, in 23rd in the NHL right now in all situations in goals for. Mm-hmm. But again, for the second straight year, they are second last in the league in goals for above expected. So they should, according to that stat, have way more goals. But I think we're finding out that players on this team, not named Sidney Crosby, kind of just have a tough time putting it in the back of the net.
Well, that's it, right? And again, I'll go back to the bottom six, and I feel like such an idiot for liking what they did to address their bottom six, because you're looking at it now, and I mean, it's like, look, old takes exposed, right? Like, it's one of those things where you look back and you're like, oh my God, like, how did we think that this was good? And, trying to address your bottom six needs with, an aging Lars Eller, an aging Nola Chari, Matt Nieto is aging as well, and you could have had a guy like Alex Nylander producing in that spot for you. Look what he's doing in Columbus, and you give him up for Emil Bemstrom, who's a good player, and he may end up putting up some points for Pittsburgh, and then Puljujarvi and others, and Jeff Carter is on his way out, and all of that. So and you know what, Chad, like, this, I've been, like a lot of people, very critical of Kyle Dubas and the moves that he's made. I think that the last thing that this team needed was Erik Karlsson. You already have Chris Letang. Like, as we saw in San Jose, it clearly does not work when Karlsson is not the sole number one guy on your blue line. It just doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying you give it up after one season, but, it's just crazy that we're already seeing rumors about Karlsson potentially being moved out of Pittsburgh. And yes, and again, I go back to Dubas. Even though I've been very critical of him and what he's done so far, he inherited a mess created by Ron Hextall. Let's acknowledge that. And if I'm ownership with the Penguins and management and everybody, I'm apologizing to Sidney Crosby for this entire mess. And unfortunately, a lot of this was done by Ron Hextall. So it's too bad. The kind of season that Crosby is having, for it to just be wasted away with no playoffs for the Penguins. It's too bad. But again, looking back and looking at this roster and the age of it and everything, you can kind of see what, you can kind of see the writing on the wall here. And, Chad, you mentioned Jari. He's had a good season overall lately. I mean, it's been a disaster.
He was fantastic at the start of the year, and he's been terrible over the last few weeks. But story of his entire career, right? Like, he's a good goalie who gets cold at times and hot at times.
Yeah.
So
and Nedeljkovic has been a nice story for them in goal, but it's just not going to be enough. And second straight year of no playoffs for the Penguins, that's not going to sit well with Sidney Crosby. So we'll doubt them next year, and we'll be wrong.
Yeah. It's got to be. It's kind of depressing as just a hockey fan in general. Even though they're in, my team's division, you have to respect the Pittsburgh Penguins of the last 20 years, 15 years, and it's the end of an era, at least, as far as we can tell. That's 2 years in a row, and they sold this year pretty hard. So you're seeing guys like Malkin slow down. You're seeing a guy like Karlsson slow down. For me in particular, seeing Jeff Carter probably going to retire this year is very sad to me. He's like a nostalgic player for me. I know a lot of people think of him as a Philadelphia Flyer, but I was a big fan of the LA Kings, and that's where I remember him from, and some great playoff runs, and just a phenomenal player, Olympic gold medalist with Canada. I just loop him in with some of these nostalgic players growing up. And it's just sad to see, this happens to everyone. It's one of the guarantees in life, but
yeah, exactly. And I think, the Penguins, like, just to wrap it up on this, and again, another great candidate for, biggest surprise this season. I think the Penguins just got caught chasing a little bit and trying to keep this window alive when they should have been doing, and we're always going to compare these two teams. You guys know where I'm going with this. They should have been doing what the Washington Capitals have been doing and taking small steps back, acquiring picks, young players, drafting, and trying to kind of retool this thing on the fly. That's not happening right now in Pittsburgh. I think that's going to change. It'll be interesting to see Dubas finally get a shot to do that because, as Jeff Merrick pointed out a little while ago on his radio show, since Dubas arrived in the NHL as a general manager, the mandate for him has always been, we're going for it. We're going for it. We're going for it. Add. Win playoff series, win the Stanley Cup. I mean, that was just with Toronto Maple Leafs, of course, the only other team he's been with. But it'll be interesting to see how Dubas can shake things up a little bit and kind of retool this thing on the fly, because that's what they're going to have to do.
Okay, well, here's a question to wrap up. I just want a yes or no for both of you guys. Let's not talk about it because we could do a full episode on this. But yes or no, Kyle Dubas will trade Sidney Crosby?
No.
No.
Okay. I think he might, but that's a topic for another day.
Anything can happen. I mean, if Wayne Gretzky can be traded, I suppose Crosby could be. I don't see it, but it's a good question.
I think the only way he's moving is if he walks into Kyle Dubas' office and says, trade me.
Well, yeah, but that's part of it too, right? Like, I'm not saying like Dubas will trade Sid against his will. I'm saying I wonder if for the betterment of the franchise, they have a conversation and he gets traded as a result. Sid chases another cup. I don't know. It's just, it's the big question. We could have a full conversation on it, but Harp, let's wrap up this episode. Let's get to your biggest surprise.